Dawn cracked gently over the sleepy river, casting a pale gold hue across the glassy surface. A curtain of mist clung to the water like a shroud, muffling the sounds of the world and wrapping the riverbanks in an eerie silence. Birds stirred. In the nearby reeds, their morning songs hesitant, as if sensing something unnatural on the wind dot, and then there it was, drifting almost silently through the fog. A wooden coffin bobbed with the rhythm of the current. Old and unmarked, it seemed more like a relic from another time than something that belonged in the living present. The water lapped gently against its sides, nudging it forward like an unseen hand determined to deliver it somewhere. Anywhere. Fisherman stood on the eastern bank, wiping the last trace of sleep from his eyes as he readied his nets. He'd taken this route every morning for the past 20 years, and the river had never surprised him until now. He squinted, something brown, bulky, drifting. His heartbeat quickened. He stepped closer to the edge, feet crunching over damp pebbles and morning frost. The mist shifted slightly, parting like a veil. The shape came into clearer view. A coffin. He froze. The wood was weather-worn but intact, its lid slightly crooked. The fisherman's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen bodies in these waters before, suicides, accidents, crime victims, but this felt different. This was deliberate, designed. He reached for the long pole attached to his boat, extending it toward the drifting box. The current fought back with surprising strength, resisting the man's grip as if protecting its dark cargo. But the fisherman was persistent. His stick hooked the side, dragging the coffin slowly toward the shore. A creak, the lid shifted, and then movement. A pale, trembling hand pushed weakly against the edge, the fingers barely able to lift. The skin was bloodless, bruised in places, the nails chipped and raw. But it moved. Alive. The fisherman's legs gave out, and he stumbled backward, staring in horror and awe as the hand twitched again. A muffled cough came from within, followed by a strangled gasp. "My God," he whispered, scrambling for his phone with shaking fingers. "She's alive." But there was no signal here, not this far down the river. He dropped the phone and instead ran toward the nearby bridge, waving his arms frantically toward the early traffic in the distance. Back on the shore, the coffin floated gently into the shallows, as if the river had finally fulfilled its duty. Hands slipped back inside. Silence returned. Only the wind stirred now, whispering through the trees with a secret too terrible to keep. Cut to black. A low female voice, broken but defiant echoes, like a whisper across the dark screen. They thought. They buried her story. But stories that begin in coffins don't die so easily. 1 month earlier, Islamabad's elite Sector F7 gleamed under the evening sun. Towering gates, imported marble driveways, and tinted windowed luxury cars marked the neighborhood like crown jewels. Behind one such mansion's towering walls, Anaya Shabazz stood barefoot on the balcony, one hand resting protectively over her 8-month pregnant belly. The setting sun painted the sky in strokes of crimson and gold, but her eyes were empty. Hollow pools that had long stopped chasing beauty. She wore a flowing silk robe, custom-made from Italy, and diamond studs sparkled in her ears. On the surface, she looked like the picture-perfect wife of Ramesh Shabazz, billionaire real estate magnate, media darling, and political donor. Her Instagram was filled with curated moments, charity events, fashion galas, couple vacations, to the Maldives. She had a walk-in closet larger than most people's apartments, a full-time staff of 12, and a luxury SUV with her name on the number plate. But inside, where the cameras didn't go, Anaya lived like a ghost in her own home. The walls, though soundproof, had heard her muffled sobs. The nursery, though elegantly furnished in whites and creams, was a room she entered alone, and her husband hadn't touched her in months, not since the pregnancy. Not since she'd started asking too many questions downstairs. Ramiz was laughing, that fake, booming laugh reserved for VIP guests and boardroom performances. She heard glass clinking and the faint echo of a woman's voice, sharp, confident, feminine. Coy. Anaya didn't need to see her to know. Zoya and Zari had slithered into their lives barely 6 months ago, introduced as a consultant for Ramiz's lifestyle brand. A former socialite turned media influencer, Zoya was the kind of woman who made other women instinctively wary. She was always flawlessly dressed, always composed, and always around. At first, Anaya had been gracious, welcoming, even friendly, but it hadn't taken long to feel it, that tightness in her chest whenever Zoya laughed a little too loud at Ramiz's jokes. Whenever she stayed late after meetings, whenever she lingered near the staircase that led to their bedroom, and then came the inconsistencies, money disappearing from joint accounts, private documents, missing from the home office, phone calls that ended abruptly the moment Anaya entered the room. When she questioned Ramiz, his responses grew colder by the day. You're imagining things again, Anaya. You're hormonal. It's the pregnancy. Stop acting like a paranoid housewife. The words were like little knives, not loud, not explosive, but sharp enough to bleed. Anaya had grown used to swallowing her pain in silence. She came from a family that valued decorum. Her mother had taught her that dignified silence was the armor of strong women. But now, with her child's future at stake, that silence felt suffocating. One evening, she overheard Zoya speaking to someone on the phone just outside the study. She's too close to figuring it out. Zoya had whispered, "We need to act before the baby's born." Anaya had pressed her hand to her chest to quiet the pounding of her heart. Act before the baby. She tried to confront Ramiz later that night, but he was already halfway out the door with a leather duffel bag and a dismissive wave. "I'm flying to Dubai for a meeting," he said. "Don't wait up." He didn't kiss her goodbye. He didn't even look at her belly. She stood in the foyer long after he'd gone, the chandelier above casting cool light on her isolation. In the days that followed, the house grew colder. The staff avoided eye contact. Her calls to Ramiz went unanswered. The financial manager she used to speak to directly now redirected her to Mr. Shabaz's office. Zoya became more bold, moving freely around the mansion, giving instructions, smiling in that patronizing way women reserve for the wives they plan to replace. One night, Anaya found the safe in Ramiz's study ajar. Inside were signed property, transfers, unfamiliar legal documents, and a life insurance policy, one with her name on it, dated 2 weeks ago. She stepped back, her breath shallow. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just emotional neglect. Something sinister was unfolding. Around her slowly, carefully, like a trap being set. And at the center of it, she wasn't the wife anymore. She was the obstacle, the one they wanted gone. As she sat on the edge of her bed later that night, cradling her belly, the baby kicked, a sharp, urgent movement. Anaya blinked back tears. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll protect you, I promise." But she knew, deep down, the walls were closing in, and she was running out of time. Zoya stood in front of the full-length mirror in her luxury penthouse suite, adjusting the diamond choker around her neck. She admired the reflection of a woman who had worked her way from whispered scandals to whispered power. A mistress, yes, but not just any mistress. She was poised to become the next Mrs. Shabazz, and nothing, especially not a sentimental, pregnant wife, was going to stand in her way. Behind her, Ramiz Shabazz nursed a glass of whiskey, tension etched into every muscle of his face. The curtains were drawn tight, the air heavy with silence and greed. They had been lovers for nearly a year, but tonight wasn't about lust. Tonight was business. She's in the way, Remez, Zoya said, turning toward him, her voice cool and measured. Every day she's here, your risks grow. You know what I have? Emails, audio, documents. Your entire offshore operation could collapse if they go public. Remez looked at her, jaw tight. You're threatening me? Zoya smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm reminding you of our understanding. We agreed. Once the baby is out of the picture, you get full control. I get my seat at the table. We both win. He downed the rest of his drink. His empire, built on stolen land deals and fake invoices, was fragile beneath the polished surface. If Anaya, or worse, the press, ever got access to Zoya's files, it could all implode. He had kept Anaya compliant for months, gaslighting her, isolating her, but she was starting to dig. And Zoya was growing impatient. There's no easy way out of this, he muttered. There is, Zoya said. I've arranged it. He looked up sharply. She tossed a small card on the table. A name. A number. Y. Use you for it. A fixer. A cleaner. He's handled situations like this before, she continued, quietly. No blood, no suspicion. He can make her vanish. No cops, no mess, just ... gone. Remez picked up the card, his fingers trembling slightly. What does he charge? He asked. Zoya's eyes glittered. A lot. But not as much as the price of a scandal. 2 nights later, Remez met Yusuf Farid in a warehouse outside the city, a place that smelled of dust, oil, and things better left unnamed. Yusuf was lean, silent, and professional. He spoke in clipped sentences and never made eye contact. You want it clean? Yusuf asked. No police? Remez nodded. Alive or dead? Remez hesitated. Alive until she's not. Yusuf didn't flinch. Then we stage it like an escape. She leaves a note. A breakdown. Disappears. You'll need a doctor to administer the sedative. I know someone. Good. We build a narrative. She couldn't handle the pressure. Postpartum anxiety. Panic. The public eats that up. Yusuf pulled out a sketch of a coffin, sleek, wooden, airtight. Floats long enough to reach the slow current, then it sinks. No fingerprints? Yusuf shook his head. Nothing left. No body. No inquiry. Over the next 5 days, the plan fell into place like a cruel jigsaw. Zoya worked on the backstory, typing a forged note in Anaya's handwriting. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please forgive me. She deleted call logs, planted hints in staff conversations. The cook was told Anaya had stopped eating. The driver was told she seemed unwell. A subtle, invisible web of lies. Remez coordinated the legal side. Papers were drawn up. Mental health records falsified. Guardianship documents predated. With a forged signature, he claimed sole custody of the unborn child in case of Anaya's disappearance. 2 of his most loyal employees were paid off to witness her supposed emotional breakdown. The sedative came from a doctor who owed Remez a favor, a potent cocktail strong enough to paralyze but not kill. The cleaner's custom coffin arrived, disguised as a wine shipment. In the dead of night, Yusuf tested the lock mechanism, the weight, the balance. Everything was perfect. The night of the execution came. Zoya waited in the shadows while Remez entered Anaya's bedroom. She was asleep, or rather exhausted beyond function. He sat beside her, stroked her hair once, and whispered, You always wanted peace. This is it. He injected the sedative into her arm. She stirred faintly, lips parting, but the drug moved quickly. Her limbs slackened. Her eyes fluttered shut. Yusuf, and Remez carried her body down the back stairs, placed her gently in the padded coffin, sealed it shut. One pale hand twitched, reflex, not awareness. Let's take her home, Yusuf said, his voice devoid of irony. They drove to the river under cover of darkness. The water lapped gently as if waiting. They rolled the coffin out from the truck bed, pushed it onto the current, and watched it drift. The moon caught the coffin's edge like a blade of light. She was gone. They stood in silence for a beat too long. Then Yusuf turned and disappeared. Into the night. The next morning, the news broke. Socialite Anaya Shabazz missing. Emotional distress suspected. Mental health struggles reported before disappearance. Pregnant wife of real estate mogul feared drowned. Zoya shed crocodile tears in front of the media. Ramez gave a brief, tear-choked statement. Staff members were interviewed, paid, controlled. Everything was in place. A perfect crime. Or so they thought, because a coffin may float downstream. But stories like Anaya's never sink without a trace. Mist rose from the river like a slow-moving ghost. Early morning sunlight filtered through the tree canopy, casting broken golden shards over the water. The riverbank, usually serene, buzzed quietly with activity, workers in neon vests combing through trash, volunteers planting native reeds, and quiet murmurs of hope that someday this polluted stretch of river might breathe clean again. At the center of it all stood Ayon Murad, tall and silent, with eyes that carried the grief of a past no one dared to ask about. He wore a simple black polo, cargo pants, and boots caked in mud. Around him, people moved with purpose, but he stood still, hands on his hips, scanning the water like it held answers. Ayon had once been a celebrated name in urban development, billionaire, golden boy, philanthropist. But after the tragic accident that took his pregnant wife, Meher, 5 years ago, he had vanished from the spotlight. The headlines had followed him for months, tycoon's tragedy, from towers to tears, until he quietly relocated, pouring his fortune into an eco-restoration project. Along this river, he told himself it was for Meher, to make beauty from ruin. But deep down he knew he was trying to save something he couldn't name in the world, and in himself. That morning, Ayon walked alone toward a bend in the river where trash often gathered. The current here slowed just enough to trap the unwanted branches, plastic bottles, forgotten toys, old tires. He often called it the river's graveyard, but today, something looked off. Floating far out, half lost in the fog, was a rectangular wooden object, too smooth, too crafted to be debris. Waleed, Ayon called to his project manager. Boat now. Waleed followed his line of sight, frowning. A crate? No, Ayon said, already untying a small rescue boat. It's not a crate. They paddled fast, the wooden shape coming into view. As they got closer, Ayon's pulse quickened. It was a coffin, not old, not worn. Fresh wood, handcrafted, closed tight with industrial bolts. A chill ran through his spine. He motioned to Waleed, pull it alongside, carefully. With ropes and hooks, they secured the floating box to the boats, edged and dragged it slowly to shore. A team gathered, whispering nervously, phones ready to call the authorities. Ayon didn't wait. He dropped to his knees beside the coffin and ran his hand over the lid. There were faint scratch marks, a splintered edge. Someone had struggled. With Waleed's help, he pried the lid open. The air inside was stale and cold. Then a pale hand twitched. Gasps echoed from the onlookers. Inside lay a young woman, her face bruised, her lips dry, her dress soaked and torn. One arm was wrapped protectively around her stomach, a stomach clearly 8 months pregnant. Call an ambulance. Ayon barked. Now, but he was already moving. He leaned in close. Her chest rose, barely. Her pulse fluttered. There was life, and not just one. A dull, rhythmic thud echoed faintly through her belly. A second heartbeat. Ayon froze. A flash of memory pierced him. His wife's ultrasound, her laugh, the way she'd held her belly just like this. He'd buried 2 people back then. He had thought he'd never save anyone again, but this woman wasn't dead, not yet. He reached in and cradled her gently as the sirens wailed in the distance. "We've got you," he whispered to her, though she couldn't hear. "You're not going under, not today." The team cleared space as medics rushed in. Ayan didn't move from her side as the gurney lifted her up. He caught a glimpse of her face, battered but unmistakably beautiful. Fragile, but still breathing. And just before they closed the ambulance doors, her eyes fluttered open for a second. They locked with his just long enough for something to pass between them. Terror, relief, maybe recognition she was still fighting. Now he would too. A soft beeping echoed in the room. Slow, rhythmic, alive. Anaya stirred beneath white sheets, her eyelids fluttering open as the sterile scent of antiseptic met her nose. The lights above were soft, diffused, casting gentle shadows across cream-colored walls. She wasn't in a hospital, at least not a public one. Everything around her whispered privacy and care. Imported equipment, polished wood furniture, floral curtains that swayed gently in the air conditioning, but she didn't recognize the place, and worse, she couldn't remember how she got there. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Her body ached with the dull, angry pain of healing bruises. When she tried to speak, her lips parted, but no sound came. Panic gripped her. She blinked rapidly, trying to sit up, but the movement sent lightning through her back and side. She cried out, but again, no voice. The door opened. A nurse in her early 50s entered, calm and warm. Her uniform crisp, her face motherly. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, rushing to her side. "You're safe now. Don't try to talk yet. You've been through a lot." Anaya's eyes darted around the room. Her hands flew to her belly. The nurse nodded quickly, guiding her hand to the bump. "Your baby's okay. Strong heartbeat. You're both very lucky." Tears flooded Anaya's eyes, not from relief alone, but from confusion, fear, and memory just out of reach. The nurse, Sister Humira, introduced herself gently, speaking in hushed tones as she wiped Anaya's face and adjusted her pillows. "You've been here 3 days. You were unconscious when they brought you in. We don't know your name, Beta. You had no ID, no phone, but you're safe here. You're not alone." Sister Humira didn't mention the man who had found her, Ayan Murad, though Anaya would see glimpses of him sometimes, standing at the door, speaking quietly with the doctor. Always distant, always watching, but never intruding. She noticed the way the staff respected him, and feared him too, not because he was cruel, but because of the weight he carried. He had a presence like storm clouds, quiet, intense, impossible to ignore. Days passed. Anaya couldn't speak, but her mind raced with fragments. Ramiz's voice, Zoya's perfume, the bitter taste of tea, the feeling of being lifted, then weightless, then darkness. She startled in her sleep often, gasping with wide eyes and shaking hands. Sometimes she would wake with silent tears on her face. Sister Humira would sit beside her, stroking her hair and whispering prayers. "You don't have to speak," the nurse would say. "But when you're ready, we'll be here." Her silence wasn't physical. Her vocal cords were intact. That trauma had stolen her voice, wrapped it in fear and locked it away. The doctors called it psychogenic mutism, a reaction to extreme emotional shock. But Sister Humira didn't need medical terms. She understood grief. She understood women who had been broken by trust. And slowly, bit by bit, Anaya began to heal. She was fed nourishing food. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow. Her baby was monitored daily, each healthy heartbeat a silent promise that life still had meaning. The clinic staff never pressed her for answers. They spoke to her like she mattered, like she wasn't broken beyond repair. It was one early morning, as birds chirped outside the window and the nurse adjusted her for that it happened. Sister Humera said, "I think you're stronger than you think." Anaya's lips trembled. She clutched the edge of her blanket and turned her face toward the older woman. Her mouth opened, and then, in a voice barely audible, more breath than sound, she whispered, "Anaya." Sister Humera froze. Her eyes widened. "What did you say, Beta?" Anaya swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. "Anaya, my name is Anaya." The nurse pressed a hand to her chest, stunned. "Alhamdulillah." Her eyes filled with tears. "You remembered. You're coming back to us." Later that day, the nurse told Ayan. He listened silently, arms crossed, standing in his usual spot at the end of the hall. But something in him shifted. His jaw clenched. He stepped forward for the first time, looking through the narrow window into her room. He murmured the name aloud to himself. Anaya. The name rang a bell, but not just any bell. A headline, a scandal. A disappearance. Ayan pulled out his phone. Searching for archived news reports, there it was. Anaya Shabazz, missing wife of business tycoon Ramesh Shabazz, just weeks ago. Reports claimed she had left their estate after suffering severe emotional distress during late pregnancy. Ramesh had given a tearful press statement. Zoya had posted cryptic tributes. The world had pitied her, but now the truth stood right in front of him, beaten, silenced, nearly buried. And suddenly, everything made sense. The injuries, the trauma, the coffin on the river. They hadn't lost her. They tried to erase her. Ayan stared at her through the glass, his heart pounding in his chest. She wasn't just a mother. Survivor. She was a storm waiting to rise. And now that she had spoken her name, the world was about to hear it again, louder than ever. Ayan Murad stood alone on the rooftop terrace of his eco-clinic, the wind brushing past him like a whisper from the past. Below him, the quiet grounds buzzed softly with life, the staff coming and going, the gardens rustling, solar panels glinting in the sun. But Ayan's mind was far from it all. He stared into the horizon. The river just barely visible in the distance. It was the same river that had once taken everything from him, and now, and probably, had given something back. Anaya. She had survived. Something no one should. And though she barely spoke, her silence screamed louder than words. He didn't want to get involved. He had built this sanctuary precisely to stay away from the noise, from politics, from society's rot. He had buried his grief beneath soil and trees, behind research and projects. And for years, he had managed to stay numb. But Anaya, she stirred something in him, something dangerous, something human. When she whispered her name, Anaya, it was like an alarm bell in his chest. He knew that name, the missing wife of a billionaire, the subject of whispers and clickbait headlines. He didn't believe in coincidence. So he made a call. Too, actually. One to a liar he trusted, Fariha Zaman, sharp as a blade and discreet as a shadow. The other to a private investigator who had once worked counterintelligence, Yasser Qureshi, known for peeling back lies like dead skin. They met at Ayan's private estate the next morning. No details spared. Ayan laid it out with the precision of a man who had once brokered million-dollar mergers. I want to know what they've said about her, what's been done, and why she was left in a coffin. Within days, the truth began to unfold like a rotting onion. First came the legal status. Ramesh Shabazz had filed a notice declaring his wife emotionally unwell and unstable, citing anonymous testimonies from house staff. It painted Anaya as a fragile, paranoid woman who had fled due to delusions. There were even fabricated doctor's reports from a clinic she'd never visited. But the twist came next. Zoya. Ayan was now living in the Shabazz estate, using Anaya's old wing as her residence. Social media showed filtered pictures of her in the garden, sipping tea on the terrace. Even playing soft piano music in the lounge taught she wasn't hiding, she was flaunting, and worse. A revised will had been filed just a week before Anaya's disappearance. According to it, should anything happen to Anaya, or if she voluntarily abandoned the marriage, her financial shares, trust entitlements, and estate rights would default to the nearest nominee, namely Remez and a business associate, ZOYA. It was a setup. All of it. Ayan's fists clenched as he read the documents. They didn't just try to erase Anaya physically. They rewrote her existence. She's alive. He muttered to himself, staring at the papers, his jaw tight. And they're pretending she's not? The ghost of his own past came roaring back. He saw his wife again, Maya, fragile and glowing. The curve of her belly under the white cotton dress, the car crash that stole her, and the baby they'd never get to meet. He hadn't been able to save Maya, but Anaya was here, breathing, fighting, silent, but still standing. This wasn't just justice, this was redemption. He picked up the phone again. "Fariha," he said. "Begin proceedings, quietly. I want every legal document traced, every signature verified. I want to know if they forged anything under Anaya's name, especially in the will." He paused. "And Yasser, find out who was paid to lie, house staff, fake doctors. I want names, bank accounts, everything." He hung up and stood still for a moment. Then he looked out toward the clinic, where Anaya was recovering in silence, completely unaware of the fire now burning in her name. She had been buried alive, but Ayan was going to dig up every lie they told to keep her there. The room was dim, the curtains drawn to keep the heat out. A soft breeze slipped through the mesh windows, ruffling the edge of the blanket wrapped around Anaya's legs. She sat upright for the first time in days, propped by pillows. Her face was still pale, her movements slow, but her eyes had changed. There was steel in them now. Ayan sat across from her in the quiet room, his expression unreadable, yet every line of his posture tense. He wasn't there as a savior. He wasn't there out of pity. He was there because she had asked him to be, because she had said 3 words. The night before that changed everything. "I'm ready now." For days, she had been silent, her throat recovering from the damage of sedatives and trauma. But today, her voice had returned, raw, low, but clear. "Anaya," took a sip of water and looked directly at Ayan. "They tried to bury me alive." A pause. The words echoed in the quiet. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Instead, she spoke slowly, like someone unraveling a long nightmare thread by thread. It started with headaches, she began. Little things, dizziness, confusion. I thought it was just the pregnancy, stress, hormones. Ayan listened without interrupting. Then came the hallucinations, dreams that didn't feel like dreams. I'd wake up on the floor. My body felt heavy all the time, like I was swimming in wet sand. She tightened her fingers around the blanket. I started forgetting things, conversations, dates I once left the stove on. Remez said I was becoming a danger to myself and the baby. Her lips curled bitterly, and then came the pills. A doctor showed up at the house, said he was a prenatal psychiatrist, recommended by the family physician. He gave me something for stabilization, said it would calm my anxiety. She looked up. I trusted him. Ayan's jaw clenched. It wasn't anxiety meds, she continued. It was something stronger. Every day after that, I lost a little more control. My hands would tremble. My legs would go numb. I started to believe maybe I was going crazy. Anaya closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. Remez kept saying I needed rest. He said I was embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. Zoya, meanwhile, started making decisions in the house, staff, finances, even decorating the nursery. She opened her eyes again. Then one night, everything made sense. A pause. Her voice dropped lower. I found a bottle hidden in Ramiza's study. It was the same medication I'd been taking, but the label had been altered. Beneath, it was a hospital prescription under someone else's name. That night, I confronted him. Her hands shook now. She let them. I told him I was leaving. I threatened to call my father. I was going to go public, and? Ayan's voice was the first sound he made in nearly 10 minutes. Anaya looked at him, and a tear finally slid down her cheek. I never got that far. That night, I remember being handed a cup of tea. Zoya was there. She kissed my forehead. Her lips trembled. She smelled like gardenias. She always did. She leaned in, and I swear she whispered, "Goodbye, darling." Anaya swallowed hard. Then everything went black. Silence fell between them like a stone dropped in water. Ayan stood and walked to the window. His fists were clenched knuckles. White. The rage inside him was cold, calculating. She had been poisoned, gaslighted, silenced, and when she became inconvenient, they had discarded her like a dead thing. Put her in a coffin. Sent her down the river. They didn't just want you gone, he said finally, his voice tight. They wanted you erased, Anaya nodded. And now they're living my life. He turned back to her. No, not anymore. Her voice was steadier now. We fight, he nodded. We fight. The war began not with explosions, but with silence. One. Early morning, in the quiet hum of Ayan Murad's home office, 3 laptops flickered to life. Legal briefs, asset spreadsheets, private investigative reports, everything was in motion. Anaya, still recovering but mentally sharper than she'd felt in months, sat beside him with a calm fierceness in her eyes. No more running. No more hiding. Now. They would strike quietly, precisely, and with the same ruthlessness that had once been used against her. Ayan had called in one of the best, Advocate Amna Tirmizi, a no-nonsense, high-profile lawyer with a reputation for dismantling corporate fraud and defending women silenced by abuse and power. When Amna read Anaya's case file, her jaw clenched. They drugged her, declared her unstable, forged documents in her name, tried to kill her. This isn't just abuse. This is attempted murder wrapped in white-collar crime, she said, tapping the folder sharply. They thought she'd never speak, Ayan added, but she survived. Amna looked at Anaya. We're going to make sure the world hears your voice. The first step was financial, a silent freeze on Ramiz Shabaz's core assets, working discreetly through court channels. Amna's legal team filed motions to halt any transfers or sales related to properties, company shares, and trust accounts under Ramiz's name, including assets that had been moved into shell companies. With the help of Ayan's private investigator, they uncovered just enough evidence to justify an emergency injunction without alerting Ramiz ahead of time. By the time his financial team tried to make routine fund movements 2 days later, everything had been logged. His calls to the bank went unanswered. His emails bounced back with pending legal review notices. His accountant's face went pale. Next came a personal protection order, a quiet yet damning restraining order against both Ramiz and Zoya, issued under Section 506 and 509 of the Pakistan Penal Code. The court, after reviewing the medical documents, Anaya's testimony, and photos of her injuries, approved it within hours. It barred them from contacting or approaching Anaya, directly or indirectly. Then came the detonator. Ayan tipped off 2 leading news outlets anonymously, attaching only a few key photos and a line, "Ask Ramiz Shabaz about the woman he left." Floating in the river. Within 24 hours, the storm hit. Screens across Islamabad lit up with breaking news. Prominent businessman under fire for alleged attempted murder of pregnant wife. Shocking legal freeze on Shabaz Enterprises. Sources confirm insider conspiracy. Wife declared mentally unfit, found alive in remote clinic. Full recovery expected. Rames's empire, once built on charm, connections, and the illusion of stability, began to crack in real time. He was hosting a brunch for international investors when a reporter barged in live streaming. Microphones surrounded him, cameras flashed. The guests recoiled. "Mr. Shabazz, is it true your wife was found alive after being declared missing? Did you forge medical records to claim she was unstable? What about the restraining order issued against you yesterday?" Rames stood frozen. He had no script for this. Zoya, watching from the top of the stairs, saw her carefully constructed world collapsing. Phone calls went unanswered. Her social invites disappeared. Her name was already trending online, and not in admiration. Behind closed doors, the couple fought. "You told me she'd never come back." Zoya screamed. "She was supposed to be dead," Rames snapped. "How the hell did she survive?" The cracks widened. Rames's investors began pulling out one by one. Legal notices arrived from shareholders. Employees resigned quietly, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. Every whisper they once controlled was now a headline, and Anaya, the woman they buried, had risen. She watched it unfold from a distance. Still healing, still bruised, but stronger every day. When Amna showed her the morning paper, she didn't smile. She simply stared at the headline. They tried to erase her. She fought back. "This is just the beginning, Anaya," whispered Dadewai. A nodded beside her. "No mercy?" He asked quietly. "Only justice," she replied. "And not just for me. For every woman who was told to be quiet, to accept, to endure. I'm done enduring." The courtroom was silent as Anaya entered, not out of respect, but awe. 9 months. Pregnant, draped in a pale blue maternity dress, with her head held high, she walked down the aisle with slow, steady steps. Every camera in the packed courtroom turned toward her. Every journalist scribbled furiously. Across the city, news channels broadcast the scene live. Pregnant wife who survived coffin ordeal appears in court. Shabazz trial begins. Attempted murder or tragic misunderstanding? There was no misunderstanding now. Anaya took her seat at the witness stand, flanked by her legal team. Ayam Murad sat silently behind her, his presence calm, unshakable. On the opposite side, Ramez. Shabazz looked like a man unraveling, expensive suit wrinkled, jaw tight, eyes sunken. Beside him, Zoya, no longer the confident socialite, wore a plain black blazer. Her lips were tight, her eyes darting around nervously. The masks were off. The prosecution began to lay it out piece by piece. Medical records from the private clinic showed signs of sedatives in Anaya's blood, consistent with long-term poisoning. A nurse testified about Anaya's physical trauma and the night she arrived in a coffin. Unconscious but miraculously alive. Then came the CCTV footage, grainy but clear. A van pulling up to the private dock near midnight. A figure matching Zoya's frame standing watch while a long object, unmistakably a wooden box, was loaded into a small boat. The dock worker who was paid to look the other way had already turned state's witness. Zoya's composure cracked. Under cross-examination, her voice wavered. I was just following orders," she said. "It was Rames. It was all him." Rames slammed his fist on the table. "You lying witch. You said she'd disappear." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Anaya sat still, unwavering. When it was her turn to speak, she rose and faced the court. Her voice didn't tremble. Her words were clear. "They tried to bury me, not just my body, but my voice, my dignity, my child. They thought they could erase me, but I'm still here, and I will not be silent again." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict came like thunder. Guilty. On all counts, Dot attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery. Zoya collapsed in her seat, sobbing. Ramiz stared blankly ahead, his empire in ruins. But Anaya didn't look at them. She placed a hand on her belly, felt the reassuring movement of the life inside, and let the weight of survival settle over her like a crown. Justice wasn't just served, it was claimed. Dot, and this, she knew, was the beginning, not the end. Spring returned to the valley like a soft sigh, warm winds rustling through tall grass, the river shimmering under the forgiving sun. Life, once bruised and nearly extinguished, had bloomed again. Dot, in a small but elegant house not far from the riverbank, Anaya held her newborn daughter in her arms. The baby's skin was soft, her breaths feather-light, her eyes dark and wide, always searching, just like her mother's had been once. She named her Ariba, meaning wise and protected. A name chosen not in fear, but in hope. A name that promised strength born from survival. The birth had been smooth, healthy, a gift after so much pain. And when the doctor placed the baby in her arms, Anaya wept, not for the past, but for the miracle of a future she had once thought impossible. Ayan came to visit the day after Ariba's arrival. He stood quietly by the door, hands behind his back, unsure whether to step in. Anaya, smiling warmly, nodded for him to come closer. He walked in slowly, reverently, like stepping into a sacred moment. She lifted Ariba slightly. "Would you like to hold her?" He hesitated, but only for a breath, then gently cradled the baby in his arms. She blinked up at him with curiosity and calm. For a long while he said nothing. "She's perfect," he finally whispered. Anaya smiled. "She is." He didn't stay long, never did. Ayan had never once asked for anything. No promises, no titles. He came like the wind, steady, protective, and free. But Anaya knew what he'd given her was more than any vow could contain. Belief when she had none, safety when the world turned against her, and space to become her own hero. In the weeks that followed, as Ariba grew, so did Anaya's resolve. She launched the River's Voice, a foundation that provided legal, medical, and emotional support to women who had endured domestic violence and betrayal. The foundation's first seminar drew hundreds, survivors, advocates, mothers, daughters, all connected by pain, but drawn together by the current of change. Anaya spoke from the stage, without a paper, without fear. Her voice, once nearly silenced, rang with power. And one morning, as the river whispered nearby, Anaya returned to the very spot where it had all begun. She wore white, not for mourning, but for peace. Ariba cooed in her arms, bundled in soft pink. Together they looked out at the water, calm now, flowing gently around the rocks and reeds. There was no sign of a coffin. Just sunlight, just wind, just life. Anaya closed her eyes and whispered her gratitude to the river, to the woman she used to be, and to the one she had become. As the scene faded, her voice echoed like a vow, soft but unbreakable. "They thought they could drown me, but the river carried me to freedom.